Thank you. I'd like to call the meeting to order of the Montecito Planning Commission on May 10th, 2017, and the time is 9:04. Would everyone please join me in this Pledge of Allegiance? All rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Mr. Villalobos, would you read the announcement about television coverage?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Montecito Planning Commission hearings are televised live on County of Santa Barbara Television, CSB-TV, Channel 20 at 9 a.m. in the South Coast, Lompoc, San Ynez Valley, San Maria, and Orchid areas. Rebroadcasts of Montecito Planning Commission hearings are on Fridays at 5 p.m. on CSB-TV, Channel 20. Today's hearing will also be streamed live on CSB-TV's website and will be available on their website in a couple of days, as well as the county's YouTube website. Now for the roll call, Commissioner Newman. Present. Commissioner Senauer.
Here.
Chair Keller.
Here.
And for the record, Commissioner Brown is absent today.
Thank you. Also for the record, it is my understanding that we will have a fifth commissioner as of next week, which we are very grateful to our supervisor for acting quickly and to planning and development for expediting the process, because we look forward to having a full contingent of commissioners. Do we have any? We do have some public comment for items not on the record. I would like to call up Darlene Bierig. You will have 3 minutes.
Okay, good morning, Commissioners.
I'm not sure your mic. There you go. Thank you.
There I go. I just want to give you 2 handouts so you can follow along with what I'm talking about. Okay.
Thank you. So we can start your time now, Ms. Beer.
Okay, thank you. As many of you know, I'm a 30-plus year resident of Montecito and also an environmental planner by training. And I really welcome the ADU legislation that's been passed down by the state. I want to talk on a personal basis. For me, I've watched our hillsides in Montecito and the fire areas be chopped up with large lot, inefficient nuclear family housing. For someone like me whose kids grew up in Montecito, they're now in their 30s, they're now having children of their own, they can't afford to come back. They would love to be back in Montecito, but they can't afford to. We have no ability, at least I don't, in a more modest house, have any ability for multi-generational housing. So I've seen ADU as giving me 2 options. It'll allow me to build multi-generational housing on my lot, and it also allows me not to have to pay into Casa Dorinda because I can put a caretaker on my lot in my elder years if I so choose. So I'm a big advocate of ADU for all the purposes outlined, affordability, flexibility, by the state of California in the brochure that I gave council. I have a problem though. In pursuing this, I've come across a deed restriction that a Montecito resident was required to sign. I've blanked out the resident's name for obvious reasons, but if you look at the highlighted section, item 2, you'll see that in the event the property is sold, the new owner shall reside on the property and agrees to be the property's principal resident, owner-occupied principal resident. Otherwise, the unit can be removed or converted. What in the heck is the purpose of this? So if I spend $500,000 building a nice unit compatible with my neighborhood. I'm in jeopardy at some later date, should I pass away or have to leave, of having that structure torn down upon resale or converted. What would it be converted to? A business use? You know, I mean, this makes no sense to have this sort of legislation. So I'm stuck in a quandary, personally, of do I spend the money building something appropriate and nice, or do I build basically, put a mobile home on the lot? That's allowed, a prefab. Any economist would tell you, or any business person says, if you're in jeopardy of having it removed and these conditions are creating resale problems, go the cheap route. For half the price or less, I can put a prefab on. So I'm asking you to reconsider your direction. I think it's ill thought out with unintended consequences. And you'll see also item 4 is very much the same thing. Now, I am an owner-occupant. I will reside on the property, but I can't tell you what the future holds.
Thank you, Ms. Burek. May I ask a question?
Yes,
What's the source of this document?
this was, well, you'll see the date on it.
Yes.
It was signed, the county planning department had an applicant sign it on April 24th who is doing an ADU. And it's an ADU basically off Barker Pass. It is not in the coastal zone.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions?
I understand from what I've heard from Diane Black and others, this is the direction. It may have been premature to have them sign it, but this is what the MPC is pushing for. I would ask you to reconsider. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments about items not on the agenda? If not, we will move on to our standard agenda. Mr. Villalobos, would you read the item into the record?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Montecito Planning Commission will review and provide comments on the revised Casa Dorinda Open Space Management Plan as required by condition number 14 of the approved Casa Dorinda Master Plan Conditional Use Permit, case number 14 RVP 5.
Thank you. Do we have any disclosure regarding ex parte and site visits?
Yes, I do. On Thursday, May 13th, I met with Carrie Kellogg of the Fire Protection Department and Willie Brummett from EHS and did a walkthrough of the property. And
Excuse me, I believe you mean April 13th.
excuse me, thank you, April 13th. And on April 16th, I did just a walkthrough of the riparian restoration at Westmont. Thank you.
Commissioner Newman?
I don't have anything to report.
Thank you. Also on April 13th, I did a guided visit of the Westmont riparian restoration with Mark De La Garza, Carrie Kellogg, on Randy Rouse, and I was also taken through Casa Dorinda with Mark De La Garza and Carrie Kellogg. Thank you. Are we ready for the staff presentation?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So as you all know, this is a recap of the Casa Dorinda revised open space management plan that was originally scheduled for the hearing of April 18th. And this is the location of Casa Dorinda, an aerial showing the open space area. And then to recap, your commission approved the Casa Dorinda Master Plan CUP revision on May 18th, 2016. And as part of that project, the open space easement was reconfigured and expanded, and the trails easements were quitclaimed and rededicated to their currently used locations, with an added trail in the northwest part of the easement area. The new easements were approved by the Board of Supervisors in September of 2016. Here is the new open space easement area, and you can see this hatched area, which was previously included, as was this, and these were abandoned, and then new areas were added here and here. This slide shows the new open space easement in pink, the trails in brown and yellow, existing asphalt path in gray, and drainage features in blue. And then you can see that the flood control detention basin is here within the open space. Condition 14 of the revised master plan CUP requires that the 2009 open space management plan be updated, and it also requires that the Montecito Planning Commission review the draft revised plan and provide comments on it before it is finalized. Just to note, the condition does not require any formal decision or action by the Montecito Planning Commission. The Montecito Planning Commission considered the draft plan on March 22nd and requested additional information, some to be provided by staff and some to be provided by the applicant. The information staff is providing today answers questions about how the plan relates to other plans and actions that would occur within the open space and plan-related costs. Additionally, staff coordinated with other stakeholder representatives. And additional questions asked by your commission will be addressed in the applicant's presentation after ours. So as you know, the revised CUP required multiple plans to be prepared. Of these, the most relevant to the open space are shown on this slide. Condition 9 requires a riparian restoration plan in the area where the old bridge and entryway would be removed. This area is entirely located within the revised open space easement area, and just to note, we'll show the locations, all of these, in a few slides. Condition 10 requires preparation of a tree protection plan to protect on-site trees from damage or destruction during grading construction, and so would apply outside of the open space where construction would occur. Condition 13 requires a native tree replacement plan, which includes the planting of trees both inside and outside of the open space. Skipping for a moment to the last bullet, Condition 15 requires that new landscaping within 100 feet of the open space consist of native or non-invasive plants, or both, and where feasible requires the use of seed stock from locally obtained sources. It's notable that it requires that invasive weeds as listed in the California Invasive Plant Inventory be removed from construction areas to avoid being spread into adjacent native habitat areas, and this plan has already been reviewed and approved by the Montecito Board of Architectural Review. And finally, Condition 14 requires the revision of the 2009 Open Space Management Plan, which is before you today. The goals, objectives, and contents of the plan are determined by the stipulations of the easement agreement by Condition 14 and also a bit by Condition 36, which speaks briefly to restoration of the native understory. And all of these plans have been submitted to Planning and Development. So now moving to the Open Space Management Plan itself. That's the plan before you today for review and comment, and the required elements of that plan are shown on this slide. Removal and control of invasives within the entire open space area, the restoration of at least 5 acres of oak woodland habitat, the maintenance of vegetation to achieve screening and buffering for surrounding residences and public views and roadways, achieving fuel management mandates, and improving wildlife habitat quality for birds and small mammals. So since the riparian restoration plan and tree replacement plan detail actions that would take place within the open space, which are not detailed in the open space management plan, we'll just briefly take a closer look at those. This slide shows where the riparian habitat restoration would occur. In this triangular area where the old bridge and road will be removed and which was added to the open space in 2016. Here you can see several areas on either side of Montecito Creek as well, where the oak habitat would also be enhanced as required in the open space management plan and discussed further there. Recall, this plan, the riparian habitat restoration plan, is a separate plan and its contents are not required to be in the open space management plan. This slide shows where the new native trees would be planted. Most would be within the open space. However, some would be outside of it, up here, in the developed areas of the site. The plan includes the locations, numbers, and types of trees, as well as the details on their protection, irrigation, success criteria, and monitoring. Again, as with the riparian habitat restoration plan, The contents of this plan are stipulated by condition, and the work is described in a separate plan, not the open space management plan. This slide is to give you an idea of how the riparian habitat restoration plan and tree replacement plan would occur within the open space. First, the property is shown here in white. And you can see the open space area outlined in pink here, drainages in blue, and trails in brown, with existing asphalt in gray. These yellow patches are where invasive vegetation would be removed, as required in the open space management plan and discussed here. Next, here is the area where the riparian habitat would be restored, as we saw in the previous slide, over to the west. And finally, here's the plan for the new native trees that will be planted within the open space as part of the native tree replacement plan. So moving now to costs. Your commission asks about the cost to implement various elements of the plans. The bond amounts for these activities, as identified in cost proposals provided by the applicant, are shown in this and following slides. So for installation and maintenance of the open space management plan elements, planting materials and labor, eradication of non-natives, and irrigation will be bonded for $290,255, and the maintenance of those elements for $247,170. That maintenance period would be for 5 years. Thanks. The riparian habitat restoration installation would cost $25,000. The 5-year maintenance, $28,830,000. For native tree replacement installation, $33,060, and maintenance, $25,770. Additionally, for the new landscaping within 100 feet of the open space, the installation would be $124,695, and maintenance, $90,000. Finally, there is a $5,000 deposit provided to planning and development for the ongoing monitoring of the open space by staff. And this is required by condition 14. It funds staff time for the monitoring. The agent would be directly billed, or the applicant would be directly billed for staff's monitoring costs. And the $5,000 deposit is there just as insurance in the event that those bills aren't paid. And also there are penalties for noncompliance with open space requirements. Your commission did ask for stakeholder representatives to attend. Today we do have here Mr. John Fry from County Flood Control. Mr. Drosendahl with the Montecito Trails Foundation was available for the previous hearing, but he has a family emergency that prevents him from being here today. The fire department is not here, but we did provide their answers to your questions online. And I believe, you asked for environmental health services, and they as well provided answers in the form of emails that were provided to you about the feature within the open space that you had asked about.
You mean the well, or what we believed was a well?
Correct. It's actually not a well, and they provided that information. Yes,
Exactly.
Thank you.
What looks like a well, but is not. Thank you.
Correct. So that concludes this portion of staff's presentation, and we'll move now to the applicants. But I want to note that we have quite a few slides for your use afterwards. When they have completed their presentation, we would like to come back to these additional slides just to help structure the discussion of the open space elements that you'll be providing comments on.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I do have one question. In the slides that you've shown so far, can you indicate exactly where the new landscaping within 100 feet of open space, where that portion is?
Yes, Madam Chair. This pink line right here, it would be 100 feet north of that.
It would be 100 feet north of the pink line.
Right.
So
it's
essentially where there are a number of buildings. So this would be new landscaping
New
primarily around the
landscaping,
new construction.
right, of non-invasive native plants, yes.
Okay, and the second question I have, now the installation bond is released after installation, and you indicate open space installation or riparian habitat installation, native tree replacement installation, and the new landscaping installation. And then everything else is 5 years, starting at what point? 5 years from the beginning of installation, 5 years from completion of installation?
5 years from release of the installation bond,
From release of the bond?
correct.
And do you have the ability to hold that money longer if you deem that the conditions are not met?
We do.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I have one question regarding the ongoing monitoring of the open space. Is there a 5 years? What is the length of the monitoring?
Madam Chair, Commissioners, that is in perpetuity. It is associated with the open space easement agreement itself. And so as long as the county holds that open space, we will be charging the owner for staff monitoring to ensure that its condition is as stipulated in the easement agreement.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Commissioner Newman, any questions? Thank you. All right, then we'd like to call the applicant up for their presentation.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry. I'm wondering if you'd like to ask Mr. Fry questions so that he can then go back to his own
Of course.
department.
Thank you for that suggestion. Yes, would you mind coming up to the microphone? Thank you for being here today.
Oh, my pleasure.
Do you have any presentation, or were you just being open to
I do not
questions?
have a presentation. I was provided a couple questions that you may have, so I'm prepared to answer those. But if you want me just to get into those questions, or if
Thank
you want to, whatever
Would
you
you
want
mind
to do.
doing that? Because
Not
they
at
may
all.
they may bring forth further questions. Thank you.
Okay. Well, good morning. My name is John Fry. I'm the engineering manager with the Flood Control District. And I consulted with our environmental operations folks on these questions because this is getting into their realm of responsibilities. One of the questions was, what type of typical creek vegetation do we encounter, mainly in the debris basin, which I think is the area of question on this. And we encounter the typical riparian stuff that we encounter all over the place. Willows, cattails, mugwort, weeds, occasional sycamore, alder, coyote brush, etc. Now, our operations at the debris basin are governed by our routine annual debris basin plan, which is a plan that's been in effect for quite a few years. Every year we enter all the basins on the South Coast. There's about 20, 25 of them. And we identify what's occurred in the previous winter, and we identify what needs to be done to prepare for the upcoming winter. Generally speaking, what we do is we maintain a 15-foot wide pilot channel through the basin, which is what we do here. The rest of the basin is allowed to grow its habitat, and the plan calls for that just to occur every year. When sediment accumulates in the basin, exceeds 25% of the capacity of the basin, then our plan allows us to go in and clear it out to a clean basin. But otherwise, it grows. There's also provisions that if there's a fire in the watershed, that in anticipation of increased runoff there, we can also go in and clean the basins out, even if they haven't exceeded that 25% capacity. So we've reviewed this plan here. It presents no issues to us whatsoever. And if there are any other questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Commissioner Sanauer.
I just have a question regarding management. You said basically it's sediment removal if it is appropriate. You go in there and clean it up and reduce it. Do you use any other type of management activities like herbicides, et cetera, or is it just whatever grows, it grows, and you just leave it alone?
Within the 15-foot pilot channel, which we do every year, that's mainly going to be handwork, okay? Now, occasionally, infrequently, we do use herbicides. Over the years, the use has gotten less and less and less, and I will say that these are herbicides that are approved for aquatic use, and we're subject to regulatory permits, so every year the basin plan is routed through them. The plan is approved by the board. It's subject to public meetings before it even gets to the board. So it's a thoroughly vetted program. So to answer your question, yes, occasionally we will, not very often.
Commissioner Newman.
Thank you again for coming today, and I have two questions. First, do you know whether this area for Casa Dorinda's open space plan is within the Santa Barbara County's weed management area?
Now that's a question I can't answer. Okay. I don't know.
And secondly, with respect to the use of herbicides near aquatic life and or streams, what are your thoughts about the use of Roundup?
Well, I can tell you the type of herbicide that we use. And again, this is from our environmental ops folks. It's called Aquamaster. I don't know if that's a formal name for Roundup or not. I don't have an opinion on Roundup particularly, but Aquamaster is what we're using.
Roundup's not on that list.
We use Aquamaster.
Okay, but it's not Roundup.
Well, if Aquamaster is Roundup, that's what we're using. If it's not, we're not. I don't know what Roundup and Aquamaster compare.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I do have one question. I was given the impression during my site visit, because right now there is considerable growth down in the channel and with fairly well-established trees and bushes. And I was given the impression that that entire area is cleared out, but you're saying you only cleared 25%.
On any given year, we will go into any basin, including this one, and we will clear a 15-foot wide swath to allow the low flow through the basin. And we allow the rest of the basin to grow as it will. And it provides habitat. It's favorably looked upon by the regulatory agencies. And we will allow it to maintain that condition until such time the vegetation in bigger flows will tend to trap sediment, and so the sediment will accumulate. And when it accumulates to an amount that we feel inhibits the function of the basin, then we will go in and clear. This basin hasn't been cleared for a while.
Okay, because it's attractive when it has the planet, the growing things growing there, and it is wildlife habitat. And so I was concerned that they said it would be all cleared away because that was the silt. But you say, when is it next scheduled for maintenance?
Well, it's not scheduled. It's every year. It's inspected in the springtime after the winter, and if that winter has brought in enough material that gives us concerns, then we will decide to do it. But I don't believe it's scheduled in its current condition. We do the work in the fall, and it's not scheduled based on the condition that it's in now.
Oh, I'm happy to see it can stay in its condition because it's much more attractive than having a bare basin. So.
And I will say that even when it does get cleared, it grows back pretty quickly. So it's just an ongoing cycle.
Very well. Thank you. Thank you very much for being here and answering our questions. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Okay, thank you.
So now I believe we're ready for the applicant presentation. And who's going to speak first? Good morning, Mr. De La Garza.
Good morning, Commissioners, Alex and Joyce. Glad to be here to give you a presentation and hopefully answer some additional questions you may have. I enjoyed our site walks that we had. My name is Mark De La Garza. I am with Watershed Environmental, and I am the author of the Open Space Management Plan, which you are providing comment on. I have about 50 slides in total, and it's organized in the following manner. And basically, it's prepared to respond to your questions, which you asked at the last hearing. So there's some open space management plan, general description of it, aesthetics, trees, herbicide use, water and water conservation, fuel management, and miscellaneous public comments that we received at the last hearing, and I'll go over those.
Thank you, Mr. De La Garza. We'd like to maintain pretty strict time controls, although we really appreciate the thoroughness of your report. So we will let you proceed uninterrupted, and at the end of each section, if we could just pause for questions about that section. And how long do you anticipate this presentation will take?
I'd say about 30 minutes, maybe a little bit longer.
Okay, we'll try to hold it to 30 minutes and that means our questions need to be limited. Thank you.
All right, I'll do my best to keep it moving. So this is the original condition which you and the Board of Supervisors approved and made for this project, and I won't read the entire thing, but the Open Space Management Plan was required to be revised and updated from the earlier one that I wrote in 2009. This new version was required to have a wildlife management plan, which it does, a tree management plan, specific and measurable performance standards and success criteria, and a protocol for annual inspections. And hopefully you've reviewed the plan and seen that it does contain those elements. The Open Space Management Plan, it's about a 120-page document which we prepared. One of the very first questions that we received in our walks and from the commission was, why must non-natives be removed? And the simple answer to that question is invasive plants significantly degrade wildlife habitat. And the removal of them is a specific requirement of the Montecito Planning Commission approved conditions of approval number 14 and the open space easement that was reviewed and approved by the Board of Supervisors in 2016. The management objectives are to remove existing non-native vegetation, including understory ground cover, shrubs, trees within the entire dedicated open space area. That's why. When will non-native understory be removed? And the question was there during the bird nesting season. And I did happen to walk in while Joyce was still doing her presentation. I think she put up a figure showing where the invasive exotic vegetation will be removed, and I hopefully you saw that it's not that extensive an area. It will be removed in the spring for the most part, and that's to remove the plants during the active growth cycle. So we try to catch these plants before they've actually set seed and scattered the seeds around. Some of the plants are annuals, and they cannot be removed in the fall because they're dead and gone. We have to remove them when we can still see them in the spring, early spring and late spring. So they will be removed during the bird nesting season, and as the consulting biologist, monitoring biologist, I will be doing bird surveys prior to them being removed to make sure that there are no nesting, active bird nests in the areas where the removals will occur. And in the instances where we have to remove non-native large trees, I would be doing the same thing there. This is the same figure that Joyce gave you. It shows where the non-native vegetation is. Oh, good, I have a pointer. So these polygons represent concentrations of where the non-native vegetation is currently, and you can see that mostly it's around the southern boundaries of the property. This is where we have existing neighborhood residences, and a lot of these vegetation is creeping through the chain link fences onto Casa Dorinda's open space area. Things like German ivy, periwinkle, Cape ivy, English ivy. And then there's also some scattered little arundo right here, which is a highly invasive plant. What is the concrete 36-inch diameter pipe in the open space? I think this has been pretty well verified that this is in fact an old storm drain outlet. Here's a picture of it, just so you recognize it. It's an old storm drain outlet from the Great Lawn. It was installed a long time ago. It's been abandoned for a long time, at least for the 9 years that I've been involved with this project. It's never been opened. No water has flown through it, but it is kind of a trash receptacle at this point and a potential hazard. And Casa Dorinda has agreed to remove it, to revise the open space plan, to remove the concrete part of it, remove the concrete portion of this and backfill it with some dirt, and it will be gone forever from site. Why is Casa Dorinda restoring the minimum 5 acres of the open space area? That was one of the questions we received, and I'd just like to point out that within that open space area, there is a 0.46 acre riparian habitat restoration area. So the total amount that's being restored is actually 5.46 acres, oak woodland and riparian restoration. And that given the fuel management constraints that cover a significant portion of the property, we feel that this is appropriate for this area, and given the fact that the goal of the restoration was to improve wildlife movement through the open space area and provide bird habitat. So we are meeting our requirements. In fact, we're exceeding them slightly. This figure shows where the habitat enhancement would occur. It also happens to show where the fuel management areas are. So let me just start out by pointing out where the habitat enhancements locations are. So these green polygons are separated by trails and by the creek, and they represent areas where native understory vegetation will be planted within the oak woodland. The reason these were selected is to provide an avenue for wildlife to move from this. This is pretty much the only location where wildlife can crawl out of the creek channel if they manage to get in there and cut across the property and get out to more open space that exists over here. The rest of this is surrounded by urban development, and it's really not suitable for bobcats and other wildlife. So that's the reason that this is configured this way. And I've also avoided the fuel management zone. So these areas within 100 feet of structures are fuel management zones, which are required to be defensible space requirements to meet fire department standards. The fire department also requires a 30-foot fuel management zone around the border of the property in locations that are adjacent to these structures. They require a 10-foot fuel management zone adjacent to roadways, so that's why this is like this. So you will not see any of the restoration efforts taking place within that, although we will be planting some trees within those fuel management zones. Explain 80% performance standard and why it was chosen. The 80% standard is typically used in a lot of restoration projects that I've prepared, and I'm sure that the county has reviewed on other projects. This was a condition imposed on this project that we have an 80% native ground cover. This excludes the oak tree cover. This is what's underneath the oak tree canopy. Right now, it's only about 1 to 2% native vegetation beneath the oak tree canopy. So this is going to dramatically improve the wildlife habitat quality out at the site. And again, it's a condition that was imposed on the project, and I think it was based on previous projects that had received similar conditions. Was the plan that was prepared on February 21st, reviewed by the neighborhood's agreement, the neighbors. They did, in fact, hire their own independent biologist, Michael Ganella. He's a professor out at City College, reviewed the plan and submitted written comments on that. I did meet with him out at the site. We walked the site. We discussed his comments and incorporated those comments into the revised plan, which you reviewed. I should also mention that Casa Dorinda was responsible for paying the fees of his fees to review it and comment on the plan. How much will the restoration components of the OSMP cost Casa Dorinda? I think you saw those numbers already. I won't go over this slide again, but the Casa Dorinda is bonding to do site preparation and installation bonds. That's typically covered in one of the bonds. And as soon as the site preparation and installation has been completed, that bond can be released if it's verified that the work was done. And the second bonds that are posted are typically long-term maintenance bonds. Those bonds cannot be released until the performance standards and success criteria have been met, and they're typically released at the end of a 5-year period. I have had some projects where they have been extended because they were not met originally. The county has kept those bonds, and the applicants were required to take some additional measures. Or, and in the case of this year, we actually got some rain and the vegetation recovered pretty well. How will this plan be sustainable? I think this was a question raised by Charles Newman. I wanted to say that the understory vegetation that will be installed is all part of the oak woodland restoration. They're all native drought-tolerant species that normally occur in coastal oak woodland habitat. These are plants that I would see in undisturbed oak woodland habitats that we're replanting in this site because they were probably present in the past and were removed over the decades that this area has been used. Once they're well established, they will naturally regenerate on their own from seed and from below ground rhizomes. Those of you that were able to walk out at Westmont and see the restoration work we're doing there hopefully got to see that these plants do in fact spread. For the first 5 years, the plan has specific performance standards. These are cover standards on how much ground cover the plants will grow, and I do this for all of these plants. They gradually increase over time. Usually within the 4th or 5th year, they do reach 85% vegetation cover. There are also performance standards for weed removal, so that we will have active management going on out there the entire duration that this work is taking place. Where is the proposed sewer lateral in relation to the open space? This was one of your questions, and Casa Dorinda has worked with the Montecito Sanitary District to identify a location to tie into the existing sewer main on the east side of the open space. The project biologist, me, will work with the civil engineer and the Montecito Sanitation District to ensure that the new trees proposed in the open space will be located far enough away from the lateral to minimize concerns about root intrusion to an acceptable level. Smaller shrubs and grasses proposed in the open space will not have an appreciable effect on the lateral, and this figure shows where that lateral is. It also shows where we're proposing to plant the replacement trees. Each one of these little dots is an oak tree that will be planted. So once this alignment is staked, we can adjust the actual planting location for oak trees so that the root systems are not interfering with the lateral. What facilities does Santa Barbara County Flood Control operate, and what vegetation is within it, and how is it maintained? I think John Fry answered that question very well. I would just like to make one comment. The herbicide that is used by the Flood Control Department, Aquamaster, the main ingredient in that herbicide is glyphosate, which is Roundup.
Before we move on to aesthetics, are there any questions by the commissioners about this portion?
I have a few regarding bird nesting and your observations and evaluation of that. Presently, do you have a count? Is it ubiquitous? Is it just a few? Do you have a sense of that?
Well, I have been doing surveys out there for years. Most of the most intense surveys I did were in preparation for the biological assessment report that I did for this project. I did identify a few nests out there. There was a raptor nest. There are a few trees which have some cavity nesting birds that I've found. I haven't seen a lot of ground nesting birds out there or shrub nesting birds, mainly because there aren't that many shrubs out there now. That will probably go up over time as we do the installations. So there are a variety of birds that nest out there, and there are a lot of cavities in the trees, so that's where a lot of the nesting takes place.
Thank you. Regarding the dry well removal, you are going to cap it more appropriately, Casa Dorinda will,
Yes.
and remove the trash that's existing before
Yes.
you do that?
Before it's removed, the board will be replaced. That's broken. And
Soon then?
Soon, yes.
And trash removed?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
The trash will be removed. The concrete pipe will be removed.
Great.
And the hole will be backfilled, so you will never know that it was ever there.
Okay, regarding stock your planting stock, are you getting any in the area, like in the flood control area where the creek is? Do you use that as stock, or?
So we do have a contract with Santa Barbara Natives. It's a local company that specializes in habitat restoration projects. They go out onto the Casa Dorinda property and other properties in the Montecito area and collect cuttings, and they collect seeds. They're propagating all of the plant materials that will be used on this site, so that we try to preserve the genetic integrity of the plants that we're installing, so they're from the local area.
Thank you. Commissioner Newman?
Thank you. Let me ask you please to put up slide 7, if you would.
7.
Thank you. So as I'm understanding it, based on your plan, this area in the lower left quadrant of slide 7 are areas where there is acacia cape, ivy, and also I believe it is English ivy to be removed. Is that correct?
Yes. So this is where there's acacia right here.
Right.
There's a little stand of black acacia. Let me bring up on my slide 7 here. I can't really read that from here.
And then, but then also down, I'm particularly focusing on the area where the creek flows.
Yes.
So right down in this area.
Right. So yeah, if you've been out there, you probably noticed quite a bit of English ivy.
Right.
Yeah. So the English ivy is very prevalent on some of the adjacent properties. There is a lot of English ivy on this person's property.
Right.
And
then it continues to the southeast a bit with English and Cape ivy, I guess it is as well.
yes.
What is the technique you intend to utilize for removal of those non-native plants in that area, or techniques?
Well, I am going to go into that in future slides, but for the ivies,
All right, I'll wait then.
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I was going to say that many of my questions were answered during the walkthrough, and I really appreciate your taking the time to take us through and let us see it visually. But I just wanted to confirm that you said some of the dead trees will be maintained, the ones that are used for nesting and for bird habitat. You will keep those, so there will be that will be even though they're dead, it will be a place for bird nesting.
Yes. So the fire department has agreed to allow us to retain a lot of the dead trees that are outside of the fuel management zones. So the fuel management zones follow along the margins of the trails and around the perimeter of the property. The dead trees that are not in those areas can be left standing as dead wood. They may be chopped down in some instances and left as brush piles, which also are used by wildlife for shelter and for nesting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Newman?
And if we could go to slide 15, please. In the context of the sustainability issue that you discuss in this slide, how confident are you that the 85% coverage that you mentioned will be attained within the 5-year period?
I'm very confident, as long as there are situations that happen that are unforeseen that could certainly delay that. I mean,
Sure.
this happened at Westmont. We had 4 years of drought. I had installed the plants 2 years before the drought hit, and I had cut off the water supply to those plants, and I had a requirement that I couldn't irrigate for 3 years, and that was in the peak of the drought. So the success criteria were not met in that 5th year. This year, they were met. I'm happy to report. I was out there doing the sampling, and they have been met. I haven't submitted that report yet, but we exceeded the success criteria out there. So,
And then second of all, with putting aside for a moment now the understory vegetation, if, as you're proposing, you were to install 15-gallon coastal oak trees, what height do you think they would attain within a 5-year period?
that's a really good question. So I do, as part of my work out at Westmont, I do go out there every year and measure the heights of the trees. And so the growth rates can vary a lot, but we installed 1-gallon trees out at Westmont, and most of those, after 6 years, are over 8 feet tall. Some of them are 20, 30 feet tall. There are a few that are not 8 feet. I'd say out of the, maybe 20 trees, maybe 1 or 2 are less than 8 feet tall. So they do grow rapidly. The sycamore trees that we planted there are now 40 to 50 feet tall in a period of 6 years.
Can you speak specifically, though, to the proposal you have, which is for 15-gallon coastal oak?
We did plant a few 15 gallons. When we start with them, they're going to be about 5 to 6 feet tall already. So there is an advantage to planting small trees. Their roots are definitely not bound in the pots, and there's a risk of the larger the trees they are, the more bound they are, and it takes them a little bit longer to become established and grow. So I expect a 15-gallon size tree to be maybe 15 to 20 feet tall by the end of the 6-year or 50-year monitoring period.
Thank you. We do have a tree section coming up, so there may be more tree questions. But if you would mind moving on to the aesthetics.
Yes. Okay, great. Let me get there. Aesthetics. So this was a big concern throughout this project, public views of structures and buildings from public roadways. So the question was, will the open space easement plants adequately screen Casa Dorinda buildings from viewpoints on Olive Mill Road? So in addition to the plantings proposed in the restoration component of the project, the Montecito Board of Architectural Review approved landscape plans, which specifically includes the planting of large native shrubs along the perimeter of Olive Mill Road to provide additional screening. The project will also meet dark sky lighting requirements. So the lights, exterior lights near the open space area will be shielded, well shielded. So this figure depicts where I'm going to show you some photographs of the open space area looking from Olive Mill Road. And these red arrows represent where the photographs were taken. The photographs are going to start at the southern end and they're going to work their way up. So I want you to see the existing view. This is the existing view near the paved trail looking into the open space area from the side of the road. Can't see any structures. You'll see a theme here. More of the same, moving up a little bit north. There's the county's flood control detention basin. It's fenced with a 6-foot-high fence. There's a little parking area next to that. Again, there's no visible structures other than the fence and the detention basin. A split rail fence and a bay tree. Split rail fence, bay trees, sycamore trees, no structures. So moving northward, we're along the edge of the channel and the detention basin still. It's still fenced.
Pardon me for a moment, Madam Chair. I don't have these photographs in the
Actually,
packet that
yes,
I
you
received.
do.
Is that,
They're all here. This is page 31.
yeah, my page 31 has question 4 on it.
Oh, then you must
So I have
faulty.
The version that I have is dated April 18th and is different from what you're showing up there.
We did add some additional photos.
I see. Well, I guess I'm working off a more recent version of April 18th. So is there another copy of that? Because I have all your photos.
Do you have a copy, Steve, you can provide him? I apologize for that. We just received a late comment and we revised the presentation to show a little more detail. We realized that there was a great deal of concern about this issue. So
I think what happened is that we had a version on April 18th, and then we had a new version
Yeah.
included later, so
Right,
that
yeah.
may have been the confusion.
I apologize
you.
for not providing you with a fresh copy of this. But I think you get the general idea here. You can't see a lot of structures from the side of the road, or we're still along the edges of the fence detention basin and the flood and the Montecito Creek channel itself. There's the wall of the creek bank in this photo. It's a sandstone wall. It's grouted. You can see that from the side of the road. If you're walking or driving by, you take a quick glimpse. What you cannot see are any structures through the woodland. And these are areas that will have additional screening plants installed. So these areas that are currently grass on these banks will have large shrubs installed. Some graffiti on the sides of the banks, more vegetation hanging over into the channel. We're getting closer to the exit bridge at Casa Dorinda. This is still taken from the side of the road. You can't see any structures from any location. That's a sycamore tree. Those white large trunks are sycamores. There are some shrubs in here. This is an existing hedge. And this is the additional screening that will be installed. So this is the channel itself, the concrete channel and the banks, and there will be additional screening installed here. 3 species will be planted as screening plants: Toyon, Catalina cherry, and California coffeeberry. So these are shrubs which will be 5 gallons in size, the Catalina cherry and the Toyon, which means they'll be about 3 to 4 feet tall to start with. These shrubs do get about 20 feet tall once they're mature. And there'll be coffee berries installed. So the coffee berries are a little bit lower, denser shrub. They'll be 1 gallon in size to start with, about 18 inches tall. They get about 6 feet tall, and they're quite dense. They get about 6 to 8 feet wide. And again, this slide just illustrates where plant materials will be installed. So you see a lot of trees being installed, the screening that will be, additional screening that will be provided. This polygon in blue is the riparian habitat restoration area, which will have a lot of trees and shrubs installed in it. Each one of these green dots are native trees that will be installed, and these green areas are enhancement areas where shrubs and grasses will be installed within the oak woodland. So we believe that the screening will definitely be accomplished. Not that you can see the buildings now from the road, but there will be no chance of seeing them when we're done with this. What is the estimated time to maturity for the selected species and the plant sizes, and why not use larger specimens? I think this gets to your question. All plants that are being installed will begin flowering and setting seed within the first and second year. The grasses and herbaceous plants will reach their mature size by the end of the second year and will continue to expand via rhizomes and from seed. The larger shrubs, such as the Toyon and Catalina cherry, will be mature after the third year, meaning that they will be producing seed, and will continue to grow for the life of the project for 30 to 60 plus years. To preserve the genetic integrity of the plant species in the area, all of the enhancement and restoration plants will be contract grown from seed and from cuttings collected in the Montecito area. Casa Dorinda cannot simply go out and purchase these plant materials from La Semita or at another commercial nursery, as they're not available and they would be not derived from local sources. So this is a really critical point here. In order to do this restoration in an appropriate manner, we need to use local seed sources, which means I have to hire a company to collect the materials and grow them from seed. If I were to try to grow larger plant materials, it would delay the whole effort by years. As it is, there's about an 18-month lead time between the time that the contract is signed, the seeds are collected, and the plants are grown. So we're looking at installing the materials in the open space area in the fall of next year.
Thank you. Are there any questions about this aesthetic portion, Commissioner Sanauer?
Thank you very much. A few questions. In the 20 or so slides, maybe even more, that you reviewed with us, I understand the additional shrubs, et cetera, that will be planted for screening. Are any of the visuals that we saw, or any trees coming down, are any of those, it's a nice screen, but of those slides, are any, other than the grasses, et cetera, any of those being removed?
There are 1 or 2 non-native trees growing along that margin that will be removed. There
Okay,
isn't.
just one or two?
Yeah, there's not very many.
Oh,
And I believe the hedge that you might have seen out there, that will
Yes.
be removed and replaced with native shrubs, yes.
okay. Regarding the graffiti, is there any mitigation involved with that in your restoration?
No, I haven't included that yet.
Perhaps.
My clients might be willing to do that. I'd have to talk to them about it.
Okay, and it could be ongoing.
Yeah, it would probably need to be. I don't know who
Okay.
takes care of it now, but currently, it is an
Okay.
ongoing problem.
Okay, just a consideration and a
Yeah.
comment on that. I think it would be helpful if that could be continually reviewed and evaluated and taken care of as needed. Thank you.
I do have one just comment. I think the concern about the screening arose because with your tree replacement plan, there's no indication of anything being planted there. So you will hope to accomplish this all with the use of native shrubs. Would there be any value in interspersing a few new trees just to replace what's currently there so that by the time some that are currently there are dead, there will be new trees growing in? Just for aesthetic, the difference between the shrubs and the trees purposes? Is that something you have considered?
Well, we are proposing to manage new seedlings that sprout on their own. So there is, as these oak trees produce acorns, they do what's called mast years. So in wet years, all of the oak trees in the woodland will produce acorns, and there'll be thousands and thousands of new acorns. And ones that are in suitable locations will thrive, and we'll protect those trees. We'll install some cages around them to encourage them to continue growing. Oftentimes, if you've taken a walk in a woodland, you might have seen an area where it was knee-high in baby oak trees, and it was under the shade of a larger oak tree. Most of those trees are not going to make it unless that large oak tree dies, and then a few of them might survive because they'll have access to sunlight. So I believe that we've already planting enough trees out there. I don't know that the woodland can support a lot more. And as trees die, we will encourage the new seedlings to come up and grow in those areas.
Oh, of course, no, I was only referring to the area along Olive Mill where there was concern because no trees are being planted there, just shrubs. And I just suggested that for variety, a few trees might be nice there, but if you feel there's sufficient tree growth, clearly that's why you chose not to put the trees there.
Yeah, I think there is enough there now, yeah. And the shrubs will really provide the screening.
Okay, as I say, that was, I believe, the source of the concern about the lack
Okay.
of screening.
Yeah, no, it's complicated, and there's lots of multiple plans, which adds to the confusion. There is, it's hard to see everything in one location, and that's why when we wrote this plan, we use our geographic information system as a tool to make informed decisions, because we can create different layers of all of these things.
Thank you. And now that we have all that information, we can see for ourselves, so thank
Yeah.
you very much. Would you move on to the tree section?
Why doesn't the open space management plan propose planting new trees? I think you answered that question yourself. There is a separate condition which required a tree replacement plan, which I wrote and which has been provided to you, I believe. As part of that tree protection plan, Casa Dorinda will plant 229 oaks, and there will be 10 sycamores planted throughout the property. 189 of those trees will be within the open space. I misspoke. It's not 229 oaks. It is 219 oaks and 10 sycamores. This shows the depiction of where those trees will actually be. You've seen this slide a few times now. I don't think I need to belabor this point, but they are widely scattered. The only places where we're not planting trees really is within the flood control detention basin, which they have already landscaped themselves. And as you pointed out, we are not doing anything along the side of the road. How many non-native trees are being removed from the open space and why? So this was one of the components that's in the open space management plan in which I identified 70 non-native trees within the open space area that will be removed. 17 acacia, 36 eucalyptus, 1 palm, 15 olive trees, and 1 pine, which is actually dead now, will be removed over the first 5 years of the project. We'll be retaining 6 specimen eucalyptus trees. 2 of those are blue gum and 4 of those are swamp mahoganies. I'm saving the swamp mahoganies because they're currently being used by acorn woodpeckers as granary trees to store their acorns. If and when those trees die, they will not be replaced. The removal of these non-native trees was a requirement. It's a permit condition requirement imposed by the Board of Supervisors on this project. And again, it gets back to the value of the habitat to wildlife. And that's why these trees are being removed. Some of these trees produce aggressively seed, and it will continue to be a problem, a management problem for years out there because they're in the seed bank now, and new seeds will be deposited from the neighbors' adjoining properties. So that's why we've got ongoing maintenance. And the eucalyptus is a fire hazard, and I believe some of the neighbors are pretty happy that we're removing some of these eucalyptus trees. They can be quite explosive in a wildfire. And the other part about eucalyptus, which I think Jamie had mentioned, is that the eucalyptus leaves themselves have phytotoxins, meaning that they are poisonous to other plants. So as the rain drips off the leaves of eucalyptus, it falls into the soil, and it inhibits germination and seed growth of native plants. Eucalyptus trees are from Australia and Tasmania. Our native plants are not adapted to those phytotoxins. What is the net impact on the number of trees on the site? So the project itself requires the removal of 29 oak trees and 1 sycamore tree. Most of that impact is associated with the roadway realignment for the entrance road and the roadway realignment around the MCU, PCU. As noted earlier, 70 non-native trees are being removed from the open space area over a 5-year period to meet the open space management objectives. Within the open space, 179 oaks and 10 sycamores are being planted. An additional 44 oaks and 99 ornamental trees are proposed within the developed portion of the property. The net change is an increase of 232 trees. I should also mention that Casa Dorinda had hired me to do a tree census a few years back in 2015, and I counted 2,000 significant trees. So these are trees larger than 6 inches on the property, including over 1,400 oak trees. There are a lot of trees on the property, and the number will go up as a result of this project. Is it feasible to retain the eucalyptus grove, and how about the black acacia and olive trees? So the black acacia and eucalyptus are not natural components of an oak woodland. Keeping these trees would run counter to the goals and objectives of the open space. Further, the olives and acacia in particular produce thousands of seeds from each tree, which greatly exacerbate the problems of weed control. The plan does retain 6 specimen eucalyptus trees, as I mentioned, 4 swamp mahoganies and 2 blue gum. However, these will not be replaced when they die.
Thank you. Are there any questions about the tree replacement plan, Commissioner Stenhour?
Going backwards, the retaining of some trees, retain 6 specimen eucalyptus trees. You're also retaining the olive allay, is that correct? And what is, just walking through with you, what is the condition, how many trees? Are there like 20, 30, 10 on each side? What is their condition presently, currently?
I know I have the number in the report somewhere. I haven't got it memorized. I believe it's around 28 trees.
Okay.
I could be wrong there. The trees, I think this is the photograph. No, this isn't it.
No.
But the trees are in fairly well, in good health. They are old, so they were installed before Casa Dorinda ever purchased the property. That whole southern portion of the property, Casa Dorinda, the original owner, the Dorinda Blisses, purchased and added to it, so it may have been a driveway to another residence that was there at one time. It's no longer there. So we are planning to maintain the trees, and if they decline, we would be willing to water them and fertilize them if need be.
And it's historical, sort of legacy area
That's why we're retaining them, correct.
Okay.
My preference would be to remove them, again, because of the olives that they produce, the quantities of fruit that are produced, and the ability of birds to pick them up and carry them all over the place is a problem.
And one more question regarding the 1,400 oaks that are currently present on the property, or in the open space, is that correct? 1,400 or?
It's throughout the entire property.
Throughout. What is, if you could do a condition, what would you say percentage the condition of the existing oaks are? 20% are in good condition? 10, is there a scale you could sort of give us a overview on or not?
Well, as part of the biological assessment for this project, we did have an arborist go and do an assessment of the health of the trees in the vicinity of where new development would occur. He did not go out into the woodland and do all 1,400 trees. But I think that you could take that information and use it as and project it out into the open space area to get an idea of the general health of the trees. So what we've seen over the course of this drought was that the large old trees, many of them were suffering the worst effects of the drought. It's kind of like people. As we start to get older, we have health problems. And so a lot of the large old trees were in poor health. And a few of them have, in fact, died over the period of this drought. And they are more prone to having disease and infestation from bark beetles, really, is what's been causing a lot of the mortality of the trees out there. The younger trees are not as susceptible to the bark beetles, and they're not as susceptible to the drought. So they...
Thank you. Commissioner Newman?
Thank you. Can we go to slide 48, please? So question, with respect to all of the trees that are both native tree planting location and landscape mitigation, they're all going to be locally sourced?
That's correct.
Okay. So as an example, I can't see the placement of all of them because of the key that's at the top, but in your proposal, you're planning to plant 12 coastal live oaks that are in a 24-inch box, correct?
That's correct.
And that'll be locally sourced?
Yes, so the landscape contractor that Casa Dorinda will be hiring to implement this plan is the same one that was used at Westmont.
Okay.
He propagated a lot of trees for Westmont, collected the acorns from that area, and he's got a few left over that he's propagating for us in 24-inch boxes, so they are local sources.
And it appears as though the largest trees are all being planted closest to the buildings on the property and also with the initial entrance along the roadway. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that's just an aesthetic enhancement?
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, actually, that was my concern, because according to, this is a much better picture of where you plan. All of the plants along the western perimeter, all of the trees are 15-gallon. Everything that's in the southern part is 5-gallon. There's no mixture of sizes. And also the ones that are being planted in the restoration area are all 5-gallon, and that's where you say the largest, deadest trees are. And I'm just concerned that you're not putting any of the larger trees in there, just the smaller. And why is there no mixing of trees sizes?
That's a good question. So the main reason that we have these larger trees planted in this portion here and amongst the buildings is for aesthetic reasons, landscaping around the buildings. We want the trees to look large and mature as possible. These ones are to provide screening from these residents that are right here. This is kind of a hill. It looks up. These residents are in a low spot. There's a drainage channel that runs right through here. This is a low spot. So they're going to be looking up at these locations. The trees will screen them. So that's the reason why this is depicted the way that it is. We want to get some height in there as quickly as possible.
I see, but, and I appreciate your concern for the residents, but for the public who enjoy the trails and will be walking through the trailed area in the south, where many of those trees are dead and will have to be removed or left for wildlife habitat, is there any chance of interspersing any of the larger trees just to provide some variety and better fill?
That certainly could be done. We could remove some of these trees here and plant them down here. I think that would be fine. I think my clients would agree to do something like that. We do see that these trees will grow pretty fast. I mean, within 5 years, you're going to have a lot of large trees out there. And as you have seen from walking out there, there are a lot of oak trees now, many of which are recovering now that we've gotten some rainfall.
Exactly. May I just ask for informational purposes, the trees that you already planted, the ones that are just over the footbridge, when you take the asphalt trail in, where are those located on the map? I think it's right in that, I think.
Let's see.
There's a little grove of trees. That
Yeah,
you
it's
recently
in
planted.
this area here. Wait a minute. Where's the creek? Here's the creek. Yeah, so it would be in this general area right here.
And how large were those at the time you planted them?
Those were 15-gallon.
So they were larger. I would just personally request the consideration of interspersing some 15-gallon among the 5 gallons, so there's more variety and quicker coverage for the area that the public likes to use for their trails.
Fair enough.
Thank you. So please, moving on to herbicides.
Herbicide use. This has been a big hot topic both in the media and here at the Planning Commission. One of the questions that was asked was why not remove tree stumps instead of using Roundup? Those of you that have walked around, I think have probably realized that we can't get equipment in there, a stump grinder, into a lot of locations because of the density of trees. And some of the invasive plants, what we're proposing to do is to chop down the large trees and the ones that will stump resprout to coat that cut stump with Roundup on the surface of that cut stump within about 5 minutes of the tree being chopped down. That's so that the tree doesn't resprout. I have spoken with Casa Dorinda, and they would be willing to bring in a stump grinder in locations where it can be accomplished. Where we have access near the edge of a road, perhaps locations around where the new bridge is going in. As trees die in those locations, we would clearly be able to get equipment in there to do that. But if you've ever had a stump grinder at your house, you know how big that equipment is and that it's towed in there by a big truck or a tractor. Are there any alternatives to Roundup? For example, solarization or hand removal. Charles, I believe you mentioned flaming in a recent email. We have looked at alternative methods. I did discuss this in the open space management plan. And the primary removal technique it's described in the plan is hand removal of weeds. There are some vines which are highly invasive, which cannot realistically be removed by hand. Repeated use of a natural herbicide mixture containing 20% acetic acid solution mixed with some orange oil and clove oil. This is used to burn the leaves of invasive exotics. This is an alternative that you'll see people using. It does have the effect of killing the surface leaves. It doesn't kill the roots of the plants. It is an acid. It will burn your skin if it comes into contact with your skin, and it can cause eye damage if it gets into your eyes. Another alternative to covering the cut stumps with Roundup would be to use large copper nails to spike the cut tree stumps, the large trees and shrubs as they're removed. And then solarization. This is a technique that involves using large sheets of plastic to cover the ground surface for 4 to 6 weeks to solarize the weeds. So this is, in effect, it causes the temperatures to increase in the soil because of the plastic, and it kills the weeds beneath the plastic. It's a little bit unsightly, and it's not very effective in shaded areas. And then lastly, a technique that's not on this list that I'd like to discuss is flaming. This is a technique where a propane tank is carried out there and a blowtorch is used to burn weeds. I can't imagine using this out here. The fire department currently doesn't allow smoking in this open space area because of the grass that's there and the high flammability of it. And the other reason I would be really opposed to using it is that it doesn't kill the roots of the plants we're trying to get rid of. It just burns the top leaves off. Many of these plants, the reason they're so successful and so invasive is that they spread readily from below ground rhizomes. A small piece of Cape ivy, an inch long, will resprout, even if it's left on the soil surface for days in the hot sun. So there are alternative methods. I have talked to our landscape contractor, which we're retaining to do this work. He has used some of these. There are numerous studies that show that it is less effective and much more costly to do than Roundup. The methods that are described for treating the weeds in the open space management plan are those that are prescribed by the Invasive Plant Council at the University of Davis. So it's an integrated pest management approach. The first method in that approach is hand removal. The second method is social. So you try to encourage your neighbors not to plant these plants. You try to encourage Home Depot not to sell these invasive plants. The third technique is mechanical. Go out there and try to mow them, disc them. And the last, and another technique which is frequently used is biological control, which I'm no longer allowed to do in this open space. That's what I was doing with the goats. So at this time, we are still proposing to use Roundup in very limited amounts on select species. If you read through the open space management plan, some of the weeds we do propose to remove them entirely by hand. The ones that are recognized can be accomplished doing that. Some of the more invasive vines and some of the trees that are known to resprout aggressively, we will be using Roundup